This is one of my favorite topics. We've been talking about Jewish family life and Jewish attitude towards human sexual behavior. We spoke last week about various verses in the Torah that talk about these topics. The basic one is Peru or Vu, be fruitful, multiply. And we also had a discussion about the rest of that verse. Umilua ta'aretz, be fruitful, multiply, and fill up the earth. And what happens when the earth is full? Do we have to continue to be fruitful, multiply? Right? And then as Jews, can we be associated with movements that seek to decrease the population control? And what is our responsibility? Remember, what we said was that for a Jew we have the specific commandments of the Torah attached to us. So we have a commandment: be fruitful, multiply, and that irrespective of whether we think the world is full or not. We have never been in a position anyway to aggravate the population of the world. 2,000 years ago, we were almost 10% of the world's population. Today, we're less than 1/10 of 1%. We lost 6 million in the Holocaust. Today, we're only about 12 million, maybe less, a little more. Depends on whose calculations you accept. We've never been in a position to aggravate the population of the world. And yet, we as Jews practice population control with a vengeance. The average Jewish family is 1.6 children. So, it's not our responsibility really to withhold our children from the world, because the world needs more Jews in it, especially more committed Jews. But nevertheless, we can work for control of population in other areas of the world, with other peoples. If we see that it's life-threatening, if the world is full there, especially places like Bangladesh and India and China and other places, it wouldn't be contradictory, because they are not specifically commanded, although the commandment was given to the whole world generally to be fruitful, multiply. It was specifically commanded in the Torah for us. We then talked about the commandment is be fruitful, multiply, which means that the reason for a sexual relationship is procreation. But then I also mentioned that there are other verses. At the end of the creation story, it says, a time will come when a man shall leave his mother and his father and cling unto his wife, and they shall be one flesh. Very graphic description, and there's having nothing to do at all with propagation. And many times it says, the Talmud deals with the question: what happens if a couple has trouble conceiving? What should they do? So the Talmud said, if a man and woman are married for 10 years and they can't have children, he should no longer neglect his mitzvah of procreation. So what should he do? The commentaries suggest, well, maybe he should divorce her. So some say he should add another wife. After all, the Torah allows to have more than one wife. But in generally you see that throughout the Torah, that people were monogamous, and whenever there was polygamy, when a man had more than one wife, it was never really the choice of the man. He did it for other reasons. Abraham married Hagar after Sarah, his wife, told him to. Jacob had married Rachel and Leah, but he only wanted Rachel. He was tricked into marrying Leah, and so on and so on. So Rashi says, I think it's Rashi, that because of Shalom Bayis, because of the principle Shalom Bayit, peace for the house, that they should not get divorced and they should remain together, because that is as important a value as propagation. But what happens in a situation where pregnancy may become dangerous? The doctor tells a woman that it's be dangerous for her to conceive again. Maybe she's had 3 or 4 cesarean sections or whatever situation has occurred for her. Can she use contraception? And if you use contraception, that's certainly not for propagation. Actually, the Talmud tells us that she must use contraception. Because there are 2 principles. One is propagation, the other is pleasure. The Torah says that a man must provide for his wife shera ksuta vonata, food, clothing, and sexual pleasure. We will get into the definition of what it means, sexual pleasure, in a minute. Jewish law recognizes sexual relations as being a primary component of any marriage, so much so that the Torah says in Deuteronomy 23:2 that a man who is crushed or maimed in his privy parts, in other words, a man for whom it is impossible physically because of some accident or something of sorts to have a sexual relationship, should not enter in Jewish marriage. Once married, both partners in the marriage have sexual obligations to each other. But what happens if this happens after the marriage occurs? Once the marriage, they should stay together for shalom bayit, but certainly would be grounds for divorce. The general obligations of the man are spelled out in this verse from the Torah in Exodus 21:10, that man is required to provide for his wife food, clothing, and sexual rights. Sexual rights is ona. Ona. You could spell it any way you want, O-N-A-H, but in Hebrew it's ayin, vav, nun, hey. And the definition of what ona is, the husband's sexual obligations, have taken very definite and detailed forms in the Talmud and codes, while restrictions in Jewish law on a woman's privilege of denying marriage relations to a husband is there. She is termed rebellious if she refuses sexual relations without a valid reason. Not tonight, honey, I have a headache. The primary concern of the law is with the husband. He must fulfill his conjugal debt periodically at specified intervals, which vary according to his occupation and ability, according to the Talmud and Ketubot. So much so, if a man wishes to change his occupation to one that would demand longer abstinence from home, to become a salesman, or he's going to go become an engineer, he's going to go to Kuwait for 3-4 months at a time. He must first secure, according to the Talmud, his wife's permission. He has to ask his wife and get her permission. This is in the Talmud and the codes. Because according to the Talmud and the codes, a woman prefers less income and the frivolity of her husband to greater income and separation from him. Maybe they weren't talking about today's Jewish women. Some Jewish princesses I know.
Not to include Jeffs.
No, but that's changed. A woman prefers less income and the frivolity of a husband to greater income and separation from him. This is fascinating because what it all adds up to is that the concept of sexual relations is the duty of the husband and the privilege of the wife. That's an incredible concept. The duty, responsibility, the obligation of the husband and the privilege of the wife. You don't have to think back too long in today's society. Think back to the 60s and the 70s. The attitude deplored by during the sexual revolution, Masters and Johnsons, etc., where sex was the man's right and the woman's duty. And the woman wasn't supposed to have any pleasure in her sexual relationships, or her pleasure was irrelevant. The world is finally coming to some understanding, catching up with Torah in this regard. The mitzvah of onah, sexual pleasure, involves not only the frequency of sexual relations, but the quality as well. The husband may not force his attentions upon his wife in time or manner of coitus. Quote from Eruvin in the Talmud. To these may be added, and I'm going to read you some. I'll read you 4 requirements from the codes, which I think is quite remarkable. 1. The reassurement of words of tenderness as a prelude to the act. 2. The prescription against sexual relations with one's wife in a state of anger, because such is harlotry rather than conjugality. The prescription against sexual relations in a state of intoxication, because no conscious love can be present. Doesn't mean you split a bottle of wine before you go to bed and everything is fine. Doesn't mean that. It means real heavy intoxication. 4. The prescription against sexual relations when his mind has been made up to divorce her. While his mind is on another woman, for instance. Quote, a man should not drink from one cup while his eyes are on another, for such is adultery. Nachmanides, the Ramban, a great 13th century scholar, in his Igeret HaKodesh states the following. By the way, if you saw the movie Strangers in Our Midst, Strangers Among Us, have you seen it?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
If you haven't seen it, rent it.
It's good.
You'll see about Hasidic life and Jewish life carried to a great extent, but it's just really wonderful. It got really panned by the reviewers because they didn't really understand what was going on there, but it's really wonderful. But this quote that I'm going to read you now is in there, and if you think about it, you remember it. Now, Nachmanides, the Ramban, states, therefore, engage her first in conversation that puts her heart and mind at ease and gladdens her. Thus your mind and your intent will be in harmony with hers. Speak words which arouse her to passion, union, love, desire, and eros. Words which elicit attitudes of reverence for God, piety, and modesty. Tell her of pious and good women who gave birth to fine and pure children. Speak with the words some of love, some of erotic passion, some of piety and reverence. Never may you force her, for in such union the divine presence cannot abide. Your intent is then different from hers, and her mood not in accord with yours. Quarrel not with her, nor strike her. In connection with this act, as our sages taught from the Psalms, just as a lion tramples and devours and has no shame, so a boorish man strikes and copulates and has no shame. Rather, win her over with words of graciousness and seductiveness. Hurry not to arouse passion until her mood is ready. Begin in love. Let her semination take place first. Think about when this was written. Right? truly, truly remarkable. This is the Jewish attitude and always has been towards human sexual relationships. Let me show you something. I'll do it on the blackboard. I might have done this before, but it pays to repeat it. The word for man in Hebrew is ish. The word for woman in Hebrew is isha. They really have the same root, and it's spelled almost the same. The aleph and shin is the same in both. They're spelled the same, except in ish, in man, you have a yud, the letter yud, and isha, in woman, you have the letter hey. How do you spell God's name? Yud, hey, vav, hey. But another name for God, a shortened version of that, is just Yud, hey. When man and a woman come together, they bring the Yud and the Hey together. They bring God in their midst. A relationship between a man and woman is a holy union. Has that element of holiness. Talk about good sex. There's nothing like it when your souls are bound together. Nothing like it. There's no thoughts about other women or other men because there's not that connection. There's not that tie. Yud Hey, men and women come together, they bring God in their midst. It's a very powerful thing there. Now, take God out of a relationship between a man and a woman. What are you left with in both cases? Take the letters out. You're left with an aleph and a shin, which in Hebrew spells Eish. Eish is fire. Yeah, a union of man and woman begins with Eish. It begins with fire. Passion. That's how it begins. But if that's all that there is to that relationship, what does fire do? Burns, destroys, consumes. That relationship won't last. What happens when the fires are not so strong? When the fires burn out? You want to keep the fires going? That's how you do it. Keep God part of that relationship, part of the union between a man and a woman. Make God be the glue that keeps you together, keeps you going. It's a very profound thought, but it's true. Let me tell you, you know Andrew Greeley? He's a sociologist. He's a Jesuit priest. He's a sociologist. He lives in the Boston area. He's written incredible books that really have changed the thought processes of America. The Greening of America, I think, was one of his earlier works. He did a survey of Boston Catholic couples recently to see if their religious practices has had any effect upon the way they live their lives. He wanted to see if what effects tradition in the home really had upon people's lives. One of the things he came up with was truly remarkable. That there was a direct correlation between the amount of religious tradition that a family observed, or a couple observed together, and the level of sexual gratification in their marriage. A direct correlation. The more traditions they observed together, the better the sex was. Really wasn't looking for that. But it just proves the point that if God is in that union, it will be a strong union in every way. If God is not, then you're looking for trouble. On the holiness of sexual relations, Nachmanides, the Ramban states, no one should claim that it is ugly or unseemly. God forbid. For intercourse is called knowing, and not in vain it is called thus. You know, in the Torah, and Adam knew his wife, and she conceived and bore Cain. And why is it called knowing? Not in vain is it called knowing. Because that's through this kind of relationship you come to know each other and God. Understand that if marital intercourse did not partake of great holiness, it would not be called knowing. We who have the Torah and believe that God created all in His wisdom do not believe that He created anything inherently ugly or unseemly. Sex is holy. It is not evil, as other religions would have it. If we were to say that intercourse is repulsive, then we would be blaspheming God who made the genitals. Hands can write a Sefer Torah, and therefore are honorable and exalted. Hands too can perform evil deeds, and then they are ugly. So the genitals, whatever ugliness there is, comes from how a person uses them. All organs of the body are neutral. The use made of them determines whether they are holy or unholy. Therefore, marital intercourse under proper circumstances is an exalted matter. Now you can understand what our rabbis meant when they declared that when husband unites with his wife in holiness, the divine presence abides with them. With them. It's beautiful. Truly beautiful. And I hope that all of you will be able to come to understand this one day. I was talking with the children in my program before, when the children of Israel received the Torah, and the Midrash goes, God asked all the different peoples and nations of the world if they received the Torah, and each one asked what's in it. You should not steal. Oh, we steal all the time. We can't accept it. So they went to another nation. What's in it? You can't kill. Oh, we kill all the time. We can't, etc., etc., etc. Finally came to the Jewish people. We accept the Torah. They said, Na'aseh v'nishma. We will do it, and then we will understand it. Well, how could you really do such a thing? You called, I think, Am Paziza was the expression, a hasty people that accepted the Torah without even understanding what was in it. And how could we make such a statement? Well, first of all, we had faith in God. And secondly, there really isn't a true understanding of Jewish life until there is a doing. I could talk from here to next year. You could stay in my class for years. And I could talk about all these things. But until you experience them, and not just once, but repeatedly, then it begins to become a part of you, and then you begin to understand how it works. And it works differently for everyone. And how it works through you. The Jewish way of life for husband and wife is a way that restores passion continuously. This fire, this passion, I spoke of before. So often in marriages it goes out. How do you keep the passion going? Well, one of the ways we do it is the observance of mikvah. Have we talked about it much in class?
We talked about it, I think,
Last time. You go through a situation go through a few months where you go through 12 days without any physical contact. A woman goes, immerses herself in the holy waters and feels that around her and emerges radiant. And the passion that is engendered from not being together for 12 days physically, although you've learned a lot about each other non-verbally, is a wonderful. I can't emphasize that more, how that passion restores itself every single month. And you hold on to that feeling and know how wonderful that union is, and how you feel that God really dwells within you and among you. And to have any other kind of relationship seems to be just so unfulfilling, unsatisfying. Let me move on. We talk about a little bit about birth control. Is birth control permitted according to Jewish law? Well, we know what the Catholic Church says, right? It's not natural. Don't do it, right? So one could have, in Catholic families typically, 10 children or more. How many children do you think there were in the average colonial family in America in the colonial times in the 17th century? How many children? How many pregnancies were there in the average home in America? 200 or so years ago, 230 years ago.
4 to 6.
14.
14.
14.
Mm-hmm. They didn't believe in anything.
They had to populate the new world.
Pregnancies are children.
Pregnancies, but it wasn't unusual to have 10, 12 kids. Wasn't unusual.
They hated us. How did they feed them?
Oh, this was a very rich land. This is a very rich land. There was nobody in it.
But most of the Jews took over the ready-to-wear industry and clothes.
That was the middle 19th century. Well, I'm talking about 130 years before that.
They took the wagons and went out west.
That's right. There was plenty of land out there. So should we continue to have children forever and ever and ever and ever? Okay. And there comes a time in a woman's development where she can no longer have children, right?
Physically,
Oh, how many?
Let me tell you, every child brings its own muzzle. Every child brings its own luck, and somehow you get through it. If you would ever take a young couple and tell them how much it would cost to raise one child till they were out of the house and they didn't have to pay for them anymore, no one would ever have a child.
Gotta buy him a car.
Somehow the money's there. Somehow you find a way. Okay. A necessary prelude to any discussion on birth control is a rudimentary understanding of the obligation of giving birth. I tried to point out last time the importance of the biblical injunction, be fruitful, multiply, peru revu, and that it is a specific obligation of the Jew to contribute to Lashevet, to the inhabitation of the world. However, if you observe the law closely, examine the wording, you find that technically the language of the law itself is in the masculine, and our sages have interpreted it to apply technically only to men. I emphasize the word technically because the intent of the law is clearly to apply to all, even Gentiles, as I explained last time. But for the purpose of birth control, this interpretation will at least follow the practice under certain conditions to exist at all within the framework of Jewish law. There have been many attempts to explain this distinction between men and women in regard to the mitzvah of peru revu, be fruitful, multiply. In the Talmud, Yevamot, the phrase peru revu miluat aretz v'chivshuha, be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth and subdue it, is interpreted to apply to one whose business it is to subdue rather than to be subdued. So it's the male's purview, so to speak, to subdue the earth, and it is the woman who is subdued. Well, in light of today's liberation of women in the world, such stereotyped roles as subdued A more intellectually satisfying rationale is in order. I mean, in the times that was written, it was understandable. But how do we understand? Because Torah itself does not say that, and Torah is for all time. So Immanuel Jacobitz, who was the former chief rabbi of England, advances the theory that the command is not directed to the women, since a woman has a natural instinct for childbirth that is so strong, and she doesn't need a commandment. You don't have to tell a woman she has to have a kid. When that biological clock starts ticking, she doesn't need to be commanded. She knows she's got to do it. And that's why it's such a terrible, terrible thing for a woman not to be able to have a child or to go childless. It's a curse of sorts. Because she's not fulfilling a natural urge that comes from within her. So a woman doesn't need, according to Rabbi Jacobowitz and according to the way he interprets the Torah, a woman doesn't need this command. Therefore, the Torah was not given to her. It was not given to her. She doesn't need to have it. It's programmed within her.
Is he the one that just had the stroke?
I don't know. Another important factor in considering birth control when pregnancy is not desired is the mitzvah of onah, which we just discussed. Onah briefly contains the conjugal, including sexual rights of the husband and wife. Since a husband and wife cannot and should not ignore their sexual obligations to each other, some form of contraception is required when pregnancy must be avoided. So if a doctor tells a woman that she should not become pregnant, she is not allowed to tell the husband, "Don't come near me." She must use birth control. No choice. To further complicate matters, we have a prohibition against hashchatat zera, normally translated as the destruction of the seed. The verb hishchit means to corrupt as well. Therefore, the prohibition is more properly stated as the abuse of the seed rather than the wasting of the seed. The importance of this complicating factor to the subject of birth control cannot be denied. Any device used in birth control will have to deal with this problem. The severity of the problem hinges on the authority of the prohibition. Is it a biblical injunction not to waste the seed, or to corrupt the seed, or to misuse the seed, or is it merely a rabbinic injunction? Some suggest that it certainly is a biblical prohibition, and therefore much more serious. Hence we have the statement of Rabbi Yochanan in the Talmud, "Whoever emits semen in vain is deserving of death. As it is written, what Onan did to displease the Lord, and he slew him." Onanism. Ever hear about that? Ever hear that phrase in church? Onanism? Well, I'm going to tell you now what it is and how it came about. Rabbi Yochanan refers to a specific incident in the Bible. It's one of the chapters that we go to Sunday school or Hebrew school or day school that they skip, and therefore all the kids really learn it well. In the Bible, Judah, one of the sons of Jacob, from which all Jews are named. We're named Jews because we're from the tribe of Judah. Judah had two sons, Er and Onan. And he had a daughter-in-law, Tamar. And let me read for you the narrative from the translation in the Bible. And Er, Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord slew him. What did he do? That's a question. Now think about that. And Judah said to Onan, "Go in unto thy brother's wife, and perform the duty of a husband's brother unto her, and raise up seed to thy brother." It's a commandment in the Torah. If a man dies and he's childless and has a wife, his brother has to marry his wife and raise up seed to his brother, and the child will be given the name of the brother. Talk about that more in depth in a minute. This is called called a levirate marriage, and it's a specific law in the Torah. And Onan knew that the seed would not be his, And it came to pass, when he went unto his brother's wife, that he spilled it on the ground, lest he should give seed to his brother. And the thing which he did was evil in the sight of the Lord, and he slew him also. Yeah.
Suppose his brother is married.
Well, according to Torah, you're allowed to have more than one wife. In today's world, Jewish world, we don't permit this kind of marriage. But I'll get to that in a minute. Okay. The church takes this up very strongly, and this is onanism, spilling the seed. So masturbation, according to the church, is a sin worthy of death, because you spill your seed on the ground.
But nowadays they can freeze it, etc., and use it for other people.
That's not wasting. Well, that's not wasting the seed. That's different. If you're having, for instance, a husband who masturbates so he could put seed in a cup to fertilize the egg of his wife, is not considered wasting the seed. But according to the church, this is all forbidden, because it's spilling your seed on the ground, just like Er did and Onan did, and therefore it's worthy of death. I had a Rebbe once who, in rabbinical school, who said most profound words. We're talking about this incident. We couldn't skip it. He said, according to Masters and Johnson, 95% of people in the world have masturbated at one time or another in their life. And then he proceeded to say, the other 5% are liars. Coming from a Rebbe with a beard teaching Talmud, it was quite remarkable. I fell over in my chair. The God would not create us in a certain way with certain desires, and then God come around and say to us, this is worthy of death. You're going to die if you do this. What's going on here? What's happened here? And you'll see how this has been misinterpreted to indicate that, even by Rabbi Yochanan in the Talmud. And again, much of the church's teachings were taken from minority opinions in the Talmud, because Paul was a Talmud of Rabban Gamliel, one of the great scholars of the ages. He himself was a Talmudic scholar, and he knew these different opinions. The problem with using this incident as a basis for hashchata zara, the sin of wasting or abusing the seed, is that the nature of Onan sin is complicated by the prohibition that he was not fulfilling his obligations in this levirate marriage. Therefore, one could easily say that it was for the sin of violating the levirate law that Onan was punished. Besides, the improper emission of semen could hardly carry such a penalty as death. Most likely, Onan's death was a result of several sins. There's debate among scholars as to actually what happened in this incident. The Talmud sees the act as one of Bia Shalo Kedarka, unnatural intercourse. While the Midrash and most scholars feel that it was a classic example of coitus interruptus. He pulled out. In this vein, Nathan Drazen, Marriage Made in Heaven, in the book that is written, a contemporary author, tries to resolve the severity of Onan's sin by stating, and I love this one, this is just so beautiful. We do not have to assume childishly that a thunderbolt descended from heaven and struck Onan dead. He suffered a heart attack from the nervous strain of such a practice. On the question of Onan's death, Let me just add that normally a brother's wife is forbidden in marriage, even after his death, on the penalty of death by the heavenly court. In other words, a woman can never marry her husband's brother, even after her husband dies. Not allowed. We just read from all these forbidden relationships in the Torah yesterday.
But a man can marry a woman's sister after.
Only after she dies. The reason why the man was allowed to have more than one wife, but he's not allowed to marry her while the sister's alive because it would cause enmity between the sisters. I could talk more about that another time, but I want to get on to this question. It was a forbidden marriage. Forbidden on penalty of death by the heavenly court.
But didn't his father tell him to do it?
Wait. However, the Torah says that if a man dies childless, she should marry her brother-in-law, right? In order to give seed to her husband. However, if the seed was not given, what are you left with? You're left with a forbidden relationship, punishable on the penalty of death. Right? That's why God killed him. Not because he spilled the seed on the ground, because he wouldn't give seed to his brother, and then that this is a forbidden relationship otherwise.
So their marriage was just basically for procreation.
No, the procreation aspect is what makes the marriage permissible. Once it's permissible, that's fine. But if he ignores the procreation aspect of it, then he has a forbidden relationship, which is punishable by death. That's why God killed him. In any case, Onan's sin, as well as his penalty, must be seen in terms of the special circumstances of that situation. This is why many scholars do not view hashkatat zera as the Torah law per se, wasting or abusing the seed. Maimonides hold that hashkatat zera, wasting or abusing the seed, is not a punishable offense because it is not one of the explicit commandments. Whether the prohibition of wasting or abusing the seed is biblical or rabbinic, it nevertheless exists. Let's take a look at the nature of this act. Rabbi Joseph Chaim ben Eliyahu of the late 19th century offers a fresh approach into the murder versus pollution arguments by stating, Hashkatat zera is not incurred because the seed goes to waste, but because it is cast where it should not have been cast according to the Creator's decree, which is in the female of the species, even if she is barren. So it appears from this that a proper contraceptive device would have to be one that would allow the male seed to be properly deposited into the woman. But you may ask, what about her destruction of the seed after it has been properly deposited? Is a woman included in the prohibition of hashkatat zera, of abusing the seed? The general answer is no. Rabbeinu Tam, one of the great 12th century Tosafot, in permitting an otherwise objectionable contraceptive device, explains that she is not technically answerable to be fruitful multiply, because it was only specifically given to men, technically. So neither is she included in the prohibition of abusing the seed. Rabbi Chanoch Ogers of Vilna, in a recent response, states, Hashkatat zera is a prohibition entirely independent of be fruitful multiply. It is determined by the manner of the seed's emission from the body, after it has been discharged and has entered the womb. Then what the woman is or is not permitted to do depends upon the separate question of her duty to be fruitful multiplied, which she doesn't have. Finally, Rabbi Jacob Emden, a 19th century scholar, supported his argument in favor of a contraceptive device when necessary on the grounds that the mitzvah of marital relations, onah, renders the act no longer in vain. In other words, since there are two elements of sexual relationships, procreation and pleasure. Once there is the pleasure principle involved, even if though she cannot get pregnant, nevertheless, it's permissible. It's not considered wasting the seed, and even if you're using a contraceptive device, let's say you're using some spermicidal jelly that destroys the seed, it's not considered a wasteful act, wasting the seed. Why? Because the seed wasn't wasted, because of the mitzvah of pleasure in the sexual relationship.
You can waste it because you're having fun.
That's right. Well put. One form of sexual relations between the husband and wife, which does deposit the seed in the woman without fear of any pregnancy, is called bia shelo kedarka, unnatural intercourse. Although various definitions exist for our discussion, the Talmud talks about two different kinds of intercourse, which is unnatural. It talks about oral intercourse and anal intercourse. I used to discuss all these things with teenagers, and I still try to do this from time to time, Jewish teenagers, because they should know that if they're becoming sexually active, that there are Jewish values in this part of their life, and what they are. And I remember when I first, to tell you how the world has changed, I've been a rabbi now for some 21 years or so, and when I first started, and I talked about the story about anal intercourse. A mother came to me very upset. She thought I was corrupting her child, and none of the kids in the class ever heard of it. Now, if I talk to a group of teenagers about this, general license is given in the Talmud for, quote, a man to do with his wife what he will. The narrative there illustrates that when a man reported to Rabbi Judah, when a wife reported to Rabbi Judah, I prepared the table for him, but he overturned it. She prepared herself for sexual relations, but he overturned it. She wanted to know, what should she do? And is this permitted? Is this forbidden? Obviously, he's talking about anal intercourse. She was told that the Torah permits such conduct, and the husband and wife relationship presupposes such conduct. Anal intercourse is permitted, but not as the only form of sexual relations, because because you're not allowed to ignore the commandment to be fruitful and multiply. So it is permitted occasionally. Is this not the same as ashchatat zera, of abusing the seed that we spoke of before? Rabbi Isaac, a 12th century Tosafot, offers two solutions. No semination is contemplated in the law's leniency. The permitted practice is therefore unlike even the act of onan. That's number one. Or number two, semination is indeed allowed, but only when the intent of the husband is unlike that of onan, in which case the act is permissible once in a while, but not as the main sexual practice. In other words, he says that there are two ways you can understand this piece of Talmud, that he overturned the table on his wife. That either you say that, well, he didn't have any semination when he in anal intercourse. Semination took place in vaginal intercourse. He just did it for a while and then changed positions. Or you could say examination was allowed, but as long as he didn't do it all the time, it was permissible. For Rabbi Isaac, the sin of Onan was that he never wanted children from his levirate marriage to Tamar. But once in a while, the act might be permitted. In other words, in that biblical instance with Aaron Onan, they spilled the seed on the ground. Might be that he had unnatural intercourse, not that he actually spilled it on the ground, but he refused to deposit it in a way that would give seed to his brother. Rabbi Menachem Schneerson in Lubavitch, this is the Lubavitch Rebbe about 100 years ago, deduced from this that if unnatural relations is theoretically improper to the marital relationship, then contraceptive relations may certainly be sanctioned. Although contraceptive relationship can never be sanctioned under normal conditions as a permanent state of affairs. Note that the attitude of the law is eminently more favorable to unnatural than to interrupted intercourse. But the most decisive statement exemplifying this view of unnatural intercourse comes from Rabbi Isaac de Troni, a 13th century Italian scholar, who states, and if you ask how the sages permitted unnatural intercourse which involved the emission of the seed, like that of Aaron Onan, the answer is, what is the act of Aaron Onan which is forbidden by the Torah? Wherever his intent is to avoid pregnancy so as not to mar her beauty, and or so as to not to fulfill the mitzvah of procreation. But if his intent is to spare her the physical hazard, because the doctor says not permitted for her to be pregnant, then it is permitted. So also, if he does so for his own pleasure, but not to avoid pregnancy, for the above reasons as implied in the Talmud, Aaron Onan, whose intent was to avoid pregnancy, sinned, but he whose intent is for pleasure does not sin. For a man may do with his wife what he will, means that couples can have a completely open type of relationship without really any inhibitions, and it is not called the destruction of seed. If it were, then he would not have been permitted to have relations with the minor, the pregnant, or the sterile woman, etc., etc. I can go into a whole another hour on sexual relations with contraception, which contraceptive devices are permitted, but in the brevity of time, I'll just shorten it. Based upon the principles that we have learned, contraceptive devices that allow the seed to normally be deposited in the woman is preferred, such as a diaphragm. In fact, the diaphragm is a very ancient form of contraception. The Talmud tells about a moch, which is like a soft sponge that was placed in the place where the diaphragm is placed and will absorb all the seed. It wasn't as effective as a diaphragm because I guess something can get through, possibly. But they used to use it. Nursing mothers would use it so they wouldn't become pregnant because they feared that would interfere with the ability to nurse and would affect the existing child. So you see that for the sake of existing children, you're allowed to use contraception. Certainly the pill is proper in this manner, and so the chief rabbis of Israel have issued decrees permitting the pill to be used, especially after a couple has two children. The IUD is problematic because we're not, first of all, it's not sold anymore because we don't think it's safe. But we weren't quite sure how it works. Whether it prevents the seed from impregnating the egg, or it destroys the impregnated egg and doesn't allow it to be properly deposited. If that's the case, if it destroys the impregnated egg, if it's post conceptual, so to speak, then it would not be permitted. Now, what about the condom, the most common form? Well, the condom should not be permitted because it doesn't allow for the proper depositing of the seed. However, there are cases where it is permitted. Let's say no other devices work. That the placement of the diaphragm is just too painful for the woman. That she can't tolerate the pill. She can't use an IUD because it's illegal now. So And spermicidal jelly is about 75% effective. Means 1 out of 4 times you've got a problem. I understand there was a firm in Israel working on a device that allows you to know exactly when ovulation takes place. Hasn't been marketed yet. I guess
used to take temperature.
take a temperature. But if you know exactly when ovulation can take place, there's really no fear of pregnancy. You just avoid sex at that particular time. But let's say you've gone through all the options and you don't have any other options. So there are any permitted contraceptive devices to be used. What do? Do you not have sex? No. The principle of pleasure even supersedes this. And when no other devices are practical and can be used, don't avoid sex. Use a condom, even though there's halakhic problems and it doesn't properly deposit the seed, because the principle of shalom bayit and pleasure in a marriage is paramount, and should take precedence at all costs. Now, the more practical aspects of some of this is, what would I advise teenagers today? I would advise them not to have sex. So don't have sex, because it's not permitted. You shouldn't do it. All right, there's no penalty of death like there is in other forbidden sexual relationships. Premarital sex, we talked about that last week. Primary vehicle of marriage of sex is in a marriage.
Get them a car instead if they won't have sex.
Right. Then what happens in the back seat?
Then you've just given them the plane.
I'll tell teenagers though, in today's world, don't have sex. But if you're going to have sex, use a condom.
Mm-hmm.
Save your life.
Wouldn't you say there's a parallel there? Maybe God gave AIDS for that reason?
God forbid I should say that. I'm serious. You can make a case for that, and others have made a case for that. But God forbid any of us really should say that AIDS is a curse put upon our generation because of its moral degeneracy, and it's a curse put upon homosexuals because they're not followed, because homosexuality is an abomination of the Torah, etc., etc. Okay, you want to make a case for it? You want to believe that?
Oh, I don't want to make them.
You can believe it if you want, but I think it's just too serious, too difficult, too heart-wrenching for any of us to put that kind of judgment together. I know of a young man who was in his middle 20s whom I buried a little while ago from a synagogue, who had only 3 sexual partners his entire life, was engaged to be married. Turns out that one of those 3 sexual partners, not the last one, which was his fiance, had gotten AIDS because she was a little wild, and they gave it to him. It's very hard. But yes, you can make cases for all kinds of things. But I would stringently try to avoid that. But generally, if you want to use birth control, condom is the one to use. But if it's the one to use in this kind of crazy world of ours, when you don't know your sexual partner. But if you do, you should use another form of birth control, especially when you're married, because you want God to be part of it. You want to bring God into that union between the two of you. You want God to dwell among you. That's what sex is really all about. And if you think of the high that you have when you reach the heights of sexual pleasure, it's not dissimilar to the great highs that you can have from meditating and feeling close to God in a deep meditation. So I suspect all of you will come to the next meditation class that we have in the synagogue.
Not something
When is
else.
that?